Every so often in the world of video games, there comes a title that people go absolutely crazy about. They constantly want more of it just because of how much they were impacted. This fanbase then grows, and rather than letting the game fade away over the years, it skyrockets its popularity far more each and every year. And when it comes to the JRPG genre, well, it's hard to think of a better example than Final Fantasy VII back in the 90s. Because this was much more than just the 7th entry in the Final Fantasy franchise, it was a monumental and redefining moment for the JRPG genre overall. It managed to reach people that normally wouldn't pay too much attention to these sort of things, opening the gates for other Japanese RPG titles to try and reach a wider audience worldwide, especially through what at the time was current-gen consoles, such as the PS1 offering the best technology out there. You could honestly make an hour or 2 hour long essay describing the actual impact that a single game called Final Fantasy VII had on the gaming market. It is equally insane as it is incredible, but we are not here to do that. All that you need to know moving forward in this video is that Final Fantasy VII has not only become one of the most popular JRPGs ever, but just games in general worldwide. It's discussed to this day as a gem of gaming, and as it stands right now, you could actually argue its name is at the peak of its popularity in 2022, which is like 25 years after it came out. Because as is the case with most gaming gems of the past, all this popularity led to a remake in 2020, once again repeating history and opening the gates to new players who haven't even thought about playing a Final Fantasy before. Except things haven't exactly been the same. Because what we received in 2020 was a new tale, a new telling of the original story with many mysteries remaining for both players new to Final Fantasy VII as well as its biggest fans. This new tale has been making changes to the main cast, possible future events, adding in characters from side games that were never in the original. Then with the recent 25th anniversary, we've received confirmation for Part 2, aka Rebirth, as well as a remaster for Crisis Core now titled Crisis Core Reunion, a side game focusing on Zack Fair, a character that plays a much more crucial role in this new Final Fantasy VII than he did in the original. Honestly, without even attempting to do so, I'm already close to getting off topic. There's just always so much to talk about when it comes to this game, this franchise, and everything going forward with it. One could argue this is just Square Enix milking it, which, again, it's a topic for another day, we're not here to discuss that. But with all of this craze happening and Final Fantasy VII being mentioned pretty much everywhere, it once again brings the question: should I play the original game now? And this is something asked by new fans as well as players who have played the game before but don't remember every single moment that has to come. Since this is a new tale, then playing the original might not actually spoil everything to come. In fact, it might help appreciate the entire project to its max by seeing all that is being changed and just being able to say, wow, that's different. That's so different than the original. I hate it. So it might seem like the greatest idea ever to just play the original now before Rebirth comes out, or depending when you're watching this, before the final third part is released. Normally people would jump on the idea of playing the original source material straight away, but let's not forget one small major detail. A lot has changed since its original release in 1997, and the standards of gaming have changed a ridiculous amount. The expectations heading in are different, and things that games got away with back in the day are far more noticeable now. This could mean a lot of people just take one quick look at the original game and think, yeah, I don't think I can do this. So if you are one of those people, then you're in luck, because I replayed the PS4 version of the original game from start to finish, completing a lot of the side content, gathering the best summoning materia, searching for the best gear, and so on. I'm still playing the game because my platinum hunting mindset has gotten the best of me. Once again, I want to keep the expectations real for those who truly enjoy the remake and just want more of this world. I won't allow any sort of nostalgia to affect me, so don't expect the entire video to be all praise and no faults, because there are certainly things that have to be pointed out. Don't worry about any huge spoilers either, as we're not here to do that, so even the gameplay you will see will heavily focus on the early hours of the game, as well as no major plot points revealed. And lastly, if you do enjoy this video, then a like would be hugely appreciated. It does honestly help a lot. Just the concept of Final Fantasy VII alone already set it apart from every other game that came in the franchise. After 6 games of medieval-ish settings with castles and kings, Final Fantasy VII came along and said, enough is enough, it's Mako time boys. You find yourself playing as Cloud Strife, who at this point is basically the cover boy of Final Fantasy. The game begins in the city of Midgar, where Cloud is working alongside a terrorist group called Avalanche as you work together to blow up Mako reactors around the city, with the long-term goal being to return peace to the planet and free it from Shinra, who is an industrial enterprise using Mako wacko in pretty much every way possible, from supplying energy to homes all the way to creating weapons and super military units referred to as soldiers. But as events take place, you come across complications and the short-term goal of the crew changes pretty drastically, with a new icon entering the scene and clearly establishing himself as the greater evil. Hint hint, he has a massive sword and beautiful luscious white hair. Also, his lashes are truly out of this world. Oh, and oh yeah, his name's Sephiroth. Which then in turn sets our crew on a clear goal of finding a way to protect the entire planet not from Shinra, but Sephiroth himself. Final Fantasy VII sets a clear goal in the opening hour that you're aiming to save the planet. And whilst its short-term goals constantly change from one thing to another, or they just need to be adjusted, such as going from destroying the next reactor to then infiltrating the Shinra building, at no point in the game does that main long-term goal change. You begin this whole journey in order to save the planet, and that journey will not be complete until you believe you've managed to do so. One of Final Fantasy VII's biggest strong points is how it constantly manages to one-up the stakes of the story of who and what you're fighting for without ever losing sight of what the end goal is. Does that mean it's boring and predictable? No, far from it, because FF7 will continue to expand its world, history, and individual stories all whilst you're on this journey to save the planet. To this day, despite its craziness and confusion at times, it provides one of the best stories in the series, with many twists, turns, and reveals that can be pretty mind-blowing even now all these years later. Now unfortunately, this game has potentially the most famous gaming spoiler of all time, not even in just RPGs. Seriously, if you don't know it, then like, congrats, I guess. But even if you are aware of it going into it, it really doesn't take away from the constant mystery this world and characters manage to provide. Unlike some other entries in the series, it doesn't rely on one reveal too much, which honestly is a very underrated strength, allowing all players to pick a different scene or moment that stands out to them whenever they think of Final Fantasy VII's story. I have no data for this, but I'm very confident if you asked hundreds of players what their top 3 or top 5 moments in the story were, the answers would heavily differ across the board. You might get the occasional ones to repeat, but honestly, there is tens of different moments that someone could say, that is the one scene that I remember. So in fact, if you're listening right now, if you're someone who played the game before fully, what are some of the most memorable and favorite moments from the game for you? What are those moments that really stand out and they define what Final Fantasy VII means to you? During your playthrough, you'll control a party of potentially up to 9 characters. Now, I will say potentially because 2 of them are actually missable. The game doesn't hold your hand and tell you where to go to have them join, so if you aren't fully exploring, you might miss out on some extra members, but trust me, they aren't what I would consider hard to find characters. Per usual, as with most good Final Fantasy games, this cast of 9 has many different personalities, strengths, and weaknesses to go along with them. And by weaknesses, I don't mean bad writing, but quite the opposite. These characters are not perfect heroes. They have flaws like any real humans or dogs would, or even cats, I guess. Some personal favourites of mine would be the main boy himself, Cloud of course, his childhood friend and hashtag best waifu Tifa, in the OG anyways. The remake got me thinking a little bit different. The quiet but smirky flower girl Aerith, and the edgelord himself, Vincent, who is just emo and goth. This one is mostly for the looks. That's not to say the rest are bad, because I do love me some foul language from Cid, or the lab rat himself, Fred 13. The silly, hyperactive and childlike behaviour from Yuffie, the over-the-top heroism and pure testosterone coming from Barrett, and of course Cat Sith, who I don't really have anything nice to say about, but he's alright I guess. A beauty of a lot of these characters comes in the way of the journey they go on individually throughout the game. Cloud being obviously the main subject here, but Aerith being another great character that massively changes every 3 to 4 hours of gameplay. The impressive part is how it doesn't feel forced on you the player. It's natural, it just comes and flows with the main story. It is worth pointing out that some characters are way more developed than others, but that's to be expected when looking at the cast size compared to the length of the game being around 35 to 40 hours to complete. With these limitations to how much can be done, it ends up leaving characters like Vincent a bit undeveloped in comparison to the rest. He doesn't even get his own character development side quest, which definitely is a shame to see, but nonetheless, each party member feels genuine and doesn't feel like the developers are just pushing them down your throat. I think this is more personal. Now with all that, it would seem that the game is great and you should most definitely play it, right? Well, yes, but also not quite. because the way I see it, most of the issues people have with playing Final Fantasy VII isn't the story, characters, or music even. In fact, those are some of the main reasons they want to explore this highly praised title. However, the main factor keeping a lot of players away is the gameplay, which is a pretty big deal for a game that's not only about 35 hours minimum, but it also requires you to take part in a lot of combat if you have any fair chance against its bosses. There is definitely a lot of praise that can be given to Final Fantasy VII, and most of that is from the combat side of things. If we are talking purely about a battle system, then to this day it does a great job of keeping it engaging and fun. It's such an underrated yet crucial thing for any JRPG to make sure that the combat doesn't feel repetitive or worse, annoying after many hours. Best way to avoid these issues outside of having a great battle theme, which Final Fantasy has pretty much always nailed, there's nothing to be scared about here, it is by providing the player with enough customization and upgrades to the characters so combat doesn't become stale. And in Final Fantasy VII, this comes mostly in the form of the materia system, arguably its most iconic feature to this day. Not only does it allow player freedom to decide which party member has what role, what their strengths and weaknesses are, but it also has you figuring out the best materia combinations for potentially hours. Depending on the situation you are in, such as who your party members are or what sort of enemy types you are facing, you can be constantly shifting around materia equipped to put yourself in the best situation possible. I won't break it down completely as that will need its own separate video, and again there are much better videos out there displaying how materia works, but in simple terms, materia is what gives your character the skills, magic, summonings and any other boosts you might want. It is materia that makes your party members who they are in combat. Outside of their weapon type and the limit breaks which you unlock in different methods as you play, the rest is up to you the player through these materia combinations. As the game progresses, this only gets better with new materia that are more powerful and can allow for some crazy combinations. You might start simple by just adding elemental damage to your weapons, but by the end if you really take your time to learn this system, you might find yourself finishing certain battles in just one attack. Whether you find some very rare and powerful materia or you just level up the ones you get much earlier on, the way you approach this system is up to you, providing the player with that key choice, basically saying you can make this as easy or as difficult as you want it to be. But don't worry, just when you feel like you've perfected it and nothing in the world can stop you, the Emerald and Ruby weapons decide to just wipe the floor with you and give you a reality check, which is just my way of saying there are some really good hidden bosses here. This is something that unfortunately the FF7 remake was never able to fully showcase because of how early in the game everything takes place. The best materia combos over there would be considered basic in the original FF7 when looking at the endgame. That said, if you enjoyed the materia system in the remake, you'll certainly love it here. Now if we're looking outside of the combat, it's not looking very pretty. Like literally, it looks like shit. FF7 can honestly take hours to get used to the art style and overall visual aspect that it presents, with some sections feeling straight up infuriating and frustrating to look at. Now if that sounds harsh, just remember I want to keep things accurate and not be blinded by nostalgia whatsoever. I want to keep the expectations in check for a playthrough taking place in 2022 onwards. Due to its background images and the layout of these areas, you can often find yourself confused on how to approach certain mountains or ladders, which areas you can or can't reach, leading to a lot of back and forth walking, which then results in probably 2 to 3 random encounters you could have done without. Like I said earlier, the combat system is very enjoyable, however there are moments you would rather just proceed with the story rather than constantly partake in battles whilst figuring out the layout of this area. Remember, as is the case with most older RPGs, there is no autosave, so dying in combat and having to load back all because you couldn't figure out a way to cross can be one of the most soul-crushing feelings possible. This isn't always the case though, as some areas, for example the Wutai village, felt very well displayed, and clearly outlined where you can or can't go with its bright colours as well as a well placed camera angle. What I found kept me most sane, however, was the soundtrack. Honestly, I can say that even now in 2022, Final Fantasy VII's soundtrack is just simply phenomenal. The music is a huge chunk of the legacy that this game has left behind. It does a perfect job of describing areas like the Chocobo Farm or the Golden Saucer, but also making you understand the sort of situation you're in and how you should feel. Is this a happy moment coming up where you have a laugh, or should I be worried because of this dark, stressful theme that's playing? Where the game was held back by its graphical limits, which are very much there, the music easily makes up for it. It's honestly a perfect example of how just looking nice isn't enough. In the end, it's all about the atmosphere building and how everything should come together. No, these clearly aren't your AAA graphics by today's standards, or I can't even tell you if they were back then, but thanks to the soundtrack bringing everything together, you will still be able to experience moments of just being in awe, just kind of standing there looking up and saying, hey, this is a really nice scene. Once you get used to the art style, you also find that FF7 does one of the best jobs when it comes to rich world building, creating this world full of different and unique locations with layers to them, regardless if they serve a big purpose or not. And what's most impressive is how no matter how different these areas may look, all of them still feel as though they belong in the FF7 universe, which is something a lot of games struggle with, making these areas feel unique, different, but still suited to be part of this bigger overall world. And speaking of the bigger overall world, the open world you travel through is far from looking attractive. Alright, let's do that again. And speaking of the bigger overall world, the open world you travel through is far from looking attractive. In order to reach these different locations I just mentioned, you have to travel through a massive, very green, very blocky, and hard to navigate land. Of course you can't expect this to blow you away, but this is easily, in my eyes anyways, the toughest part of the game to get through visually, especially since you'll be doing a lot of back and forth between different locations the entirety of the game. For a title that encourages exploration in so many ways with its side stories or finding more powerful materia, it can be easy to get frustrated with its open world, especially if you aren't 100% sure where to go next or how to reach one specific area. Now before you start freaking out saying you can't imagine yourself ever doing this, because trust me, I can totally see that happening, it's worth pointing out that these PS4, Xbox, PC, Switch, wherever the you want to play it these days, all of these come with a few extra settings that can definitely help make this a smoother experience, to say the least. First of all, there is the 3x speed as well as the no encounter mode. This is perfect if you just want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. Now personally, I wouldn't recommend the no encounter mode, as you will regret that in the late game when you realize how heavily underleveled you are. The 3x speed mode on the other hand is a blessing for late game grinding. Going in and out of battles 3 times as fast when you're farming for XP just saves a ridiculous amount of time. You could say saves you 3 times the time. The God mode setting on the other hand is something I would definitely not recommend to absolutely anyone, as it just takes away all the fun from the game. Sure, you can beat everyone pretty much guaranteed without even thinking what you're doing, but if you're choosing to play a JRPG, is that really what you want to be doing, or would you rather have to think your steps through and feel somewhat good when you win a battle? Last little tip I would say for those who really want to make sure they get the best full experience, there are some very good guides out there. However, be warned, because many of them just contain all the spoilers for the game, so I wouldn't look anything up until you're near the end and you just want some late game items and materia. The Knights of the Round is an example of a summon I highly recommend getting, but having to figure out on your own that you need a special golden chocobo that can go anywhere on the world map in order to get it can be a challenging task, to say the least. But again, if you do decide to do that, look out for spoilers, or just make sure the guide you're following is spoiler free. After looking at many aspects of the game, both the good and bad, despite the title of this video, I am in no position to tell you what to do. But the real reason behind this video was to showcase and discuss what I would consider the main things that will tell you if this game is for you or not. Not everyone can get past the visual presentations of this game, the same way some people don't have a problem with it, but they wanted to know if the story and journey is worth the long investment. We all have different things that we look out for in games, so with that said, here's where I, myself, stand. In my opinion, if you are someone who has been considering the original FF7 for a while now, then it is still a game worth playing. There are things you'll need to put up with that may be frustrating, but as I mentioned before, there are methods to get around some of these issues. The old graphics are pretty obvious considering how old this game is, but this game is so much more than just visuals. It's about a bold story and lore, the world building, a cast of characters that feels so natural to be around, and a phenomenal soundtrack to keep you going for hours upon hours. Any game that manages to combine so many of its strengths naturally into one cohesive package is a great experience, and Final Fantasy VII is that great experience. After all, you don't become considered one of the best JRPGs ever made for no reason. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then a like or a comment will be a huge help to push this out to new viewers and hopefully get some love from the algorithm, as these videos do take a lot of time, having to play the whole game again, then script and editing and all that fun YouTuber stuff. Let me know what you thought of the video. I am always open to criticism as it helps make future content better, so it's a win-win. You get to criticize me, and also what are your opinions on Final Fantasy VII? Have you played it before, or are you planning to play it after this video? Or maybe you're no longer interested. I have 3 more videos planned for the end of the year, which which I won't say here in case there are some delays, but 2 of them will be full analysis, meaning longer videos than this one. If I had to guess anyways, most certainly they will be longer. That said, if you really wanted to know what those videos are, then you can actually check my Twitter, because I tweeted about it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Genuinely, it means the world to me, and I hope you enjoyed. With that said, have a great day, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.